platforms. You can get us on Twitter at Periscope. You can get us on our Facebook page at Off the Ball, and also on YouTube as well. So get your comments in to us throughout the afternoon. Joining me in studio, I have Ruaidhri O'Connor of the Irish Independent, fresh from the flight home from Cardiff this morning.
Fresh is a strong word, but yeah, back.
And also Gavin Cooney, after a savage attack on print journalists last Sunday. So on the back of our pay-per-view, we've decided to bring you in and set you up for a fall.
I've been taken out of my comfortable little Twitter filter bubble.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I have to face the ramifications of my tweeting thumbs, made heavy by the massive chip on my shoulder and these torturous analogies. Will I get into it now, or we just go to the rugby?
We can get into it briefly now. There were a couple of bits. For those who missed it last week, we had I suppose an in-depth discussion with Hugh Farrelly about how there were cutbacks being made at the Irish Daily Mail and Mail on Sunday, and I suppose we ended up segueing off into a discussion about how print journalism is in a tough time, and I suppose the positives and the negatives about the growth of digital journalism.
Yeah, look, I don't want to come across disrespectful, because obviously a horrible scenario, and best of luck to everyone involved. But the undercurrent, the idea that online journalism is, first of all, it's somehow different. Like, all the newspapers have websites, so we're all online journalists. I seem to be talking about online only. To declare my interests, I worked at Bolts.ie for 3 years, and now I'm with the 42, so I'm digital only. But the idea that it's somehow of lesser quality automatically is wrong and kind of ignorant, and it's annoying. I do find it annoying, and people will be giving out that, this guy just has a chip on his shoulder. Yeah, probably I do, and I'll admit that. But it's also, it's just to give you an example of why it's wrong. Like Murray Kinsella's rugby analysis on the 42 is outstanding. Use the tools available to a digital journalist, like GIFs, like pictures, etc., to serve an audience, and then papers have followed suit, like the Irish Indo, with really good analysis of their own. So that's a digital outlet setting the tone, and that was followed by the print outlets, and that's great. There are problems with digital outlets. Obviously, I'll get into them if you really want me to. But I think there's a wider point beyond the massive chip on my shoulder, to go back to that, is these places, pathways into journalism has completely changed, even in 5 or 7 years. Because when I was in college, I'd be ringing people for advice, and I was like, how to get in, and they would say, go in as a sub-editor or something like that, and you work in the office, and then you might get your name in the paper at some point. But now, small digital online publications, like Bolts, where I started, like Sports Show, like all these places, they're giving young journalists jobs now. And there's problems, I'll admit that, but there's loads of opportunities as well. You're not reliant on the kindness of an editor with limited space to get your name in the paper. You can just go and do it. And it's difficult to strike the time between doing what you want to do, and there are other things that have to be done to keep the lights on, and that's fine, and that's a conversation that'll go on everywhere. But I don't like this idea of, there are enough reasons for young people not to give journalism a go as is. So without then saying that the place that you're going to start off is somehow of inferior quality, I think that's a little bit cynical, and it's a little bit wrong.
Rory, you're a battle-hardened print man. Absolutely. All your life.
Bunker down here.
What do you think of that scathing attack?
It's not a scathing attack. I think it's a very fair. It's a fair point. There's a lot of excellent work done online, and I think I've no slavish loyalty to this format. I just want people to be able to be look well paid, to do good work, and to have it published. And I think that the issue is that so much stuff is out there for free, and I think probably if I've grown up with the internet. I'm 36. It's always been there. I look pretty much I download papers on my phone now. I do pay for them, but I don't. I hate going to the shop. I'd much rather pay whatever it is and get a tablet format. I prefer the way it's laid out, but I still use your website. I still use all the everyone's a modern consumer now. Even people who say they hate it, they're all on their phones. They're all looking at it. They're all clicking links through Twitter and stuff like that. It's finding a way of making it pay. That's the big thing, and I think people losing jobs. It's finding a way of transferring those jobs into an online world where the product works and where the quality stays. I do have concerns sometimes because of the limitless space in online that stuff isn't edited as well. Editing is becoming an old-fashioned concept. Even within the newspapers, there's not as many sub-editors as there used to be. But there's excellent work done online, and there's excellent work done in the papers. Sometimes the papers have too high a regard for ourselves. Sometimes the stuff isn't as good. You know, like there's no sacred way of doing things. You know, it's all about doing good work well and you know, investing time and effort into it. The problem is, because of all of the, you know, I'm no media expert, but because there's no money coming in for the work apart from like a small amount of advertising, it's harder to do it and dedicate the time to do it. And that's where the concern is, and that's why there's young people leaving journalism all the time and going into PR jobs and working for government ministers, and you know, it's a wider conversation.
Yeah. Okay. We are a little bit shorter on time than usual in the pay-per-view today, though, so it is probably something we might come back to another day. Before we get into the action, though, we're just going to go through the back pages, and first of all, a front page on the Sunday Times this afternoon. There was a story that broke last night. The Sunday Times, Delaneys unexplained €100,000 cheque to FAI. Mark Tighe is writing, John Delaney, chief executive of the FAI, wrote a personal cheque for €100,000 to his employer in 2017. Delaney has refused to explain the reason for the payment. The FAI did release a statement, though, last night, which I'll read out in a moment. But he says, last night the FAI boss failed in an emergency application before the judge Anthony Barr of the High Court to prevent the Sunday Times revealing details of the payment. Following a 3-hour hearing, the judge ruled in favour of the newspaper's right to report the existence of the payment. There was a statement last night following that from the on behalf of the FAI Chief Executive John Delaney. The FAI Chief Executive John Delaney has stated that he provided the FAI with a €100,000 bridging loan in April 2017. The short-term loan was required to aid cash flow on that occasion and was repaid in full to John Delaney by the association in June 2017. The CEO has also confirmed that his UEFA remuneration for 2018 has been donated back to the FAI on a voluntary basis. Speaking tonight, John Delaney said, I'm aware of stories circulating around this loan dating back to 2017. I confirmed that I made a once-off bridging loan to the association to aid a very short-term cash flow issue. This is the only occasion on which I provided the association with a short-term loan. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but we will just go into the rest of the back pages first. Back page of the Sunday Times today. Clueless in Cardiff. Shot of some of the Irish players yesterday looking pretty lost in the Principality Stadium. Ireland blown away by slam champions Wales. That's after Wales's 25-7 win against Ireland yesterday. The Sunday Independent also go with a picture of a forlorn looking Johnny Sexton. Don't give up on us. Schmidt's plea to fans after Cardiff horror show. The Mail on Sunday. Don't really hold back. Picture of Conor Murray there, and the headline, Shambles, rampant Wales blow away Ireland to land Grand Slam to leave Schmidt's World Cup plans in tatters. It's a football story that leads on the back of the Star on Sunday. £200 million, Real must deliver a world record fee to land Spurs Eriksen. In the Sunday World today, Schmidt happens. I think we've seen this one a few times from the tabloids down the years. It's always a good one to go to. Don't give up on this team, pleads Joe after Wales bashing, and some pretty unhappy looking Irish players watching on at the trophy presentation yesterday in Cardiff. On the back of the Sunday Mirror, you're the number one that I want. Real boss Zidane to fight for Red Devils keeper De Gea as revolution begins. So United face a big battle to keep David De Gea, apparently, according to the Star, or the Mirror I should say. And finally, for the love of quad, Pep says sorry, but City go through. That's after Man City's controversial FA Cup quarter-final winner against Swansea yesterday. Quad referencing City going for 4 trophies this season. That is still on. We're going to start, gents, though, with events in Cardiff and I suppose the reaction to yesterday's match. Rory, you were there. Describe what you saw. In a limited amount of time.
Probably the worst Ireland performance I've covered. Just so, I think I counted it. It's 117 days since they beat the All Blacks, and to fall that far so quickly is fascinating. Really, like to everyone's trying to understand what's gone wrong, and there's a couple of theories put out there in the papers today. But I think the only people who actually can explain it are in that camp, because they are there on a daily basis. And as it stands, no one has come up, with a clear and understandable way of explaining it. I mean, Joe Schmidt reached for a couple of excuses yesterday. He you know, he threw out the line, you know, will be okay for the World Cup, which, you know, his record is excellent, and he has earned the right to turn this around. But as Peter O'Reilly writes in the Sunday Times, this is the biggest challenge of his career. And then Neil Francis was the one that I was drawn to first this morning. I think he probably picks it apart in 1,000 words with very good clarity. Doesn't, like, you know, it's often said that the Irish rugby team get an easy ride in the press. I think today's papers would give a light to that. I think, you know, it's pretty relentlessly negative, and deservedly so, and I think it's calling it as it sees it. You know, Neil Francis pointing out that, you know, Schmidt's team don't play catch-up rugby, so they found themselves behind within 90 seconds against England. There's 61 seconds yesterday, and they couldn't figure it out. They couldn't figure out a way of getting back. He talks about Sexton and Murray and how they're basically going to have to be rehabilitated at their provinces now because they're just playing so badly. I mean, has Johnny Sexton ever had a worse 30 minutes of rugby than that half an hour after half time? I mean, you know, he almost felt like he should have been substituted for his own sanity, for want of a better, you know, like, to just get him out of there. So look, there's so much to try and sift through because it was such a bad performance, and it's difficult to know where to start.
Yeah, like, I mean, just some of the, I'll pick out a couple of paragraphs here from Neil Francis, talking about the decision to have the roof open. This was a fundamental error of judgment by Schmidt. Bloody-mindedness and awkwardness are one thing, but ceding advantage to a team that has something tangible to chase was an enormous mistake. Another line, there was evidence of this, talking about how comfortable Wales were. There was evidence of this as the final whistle blew. Wales had run 110 metres with the ball all day. All they had to do was tackle and wait for the mistakes to come. And when Ireland tried to respond, not only did their skills break down under extraordinary pressure, they broke down because they could not play football in dreadful conditions. And one other line, Ireland have not become a bad team overnight, but they have become a mediocre team over the space of 3 months, and they will have to address that decline.
Yeah, just throw in this one here. The candles have been burning low in Joe Schmidt's cathedral recently. There have been no voluminous canons of play, no invention, no surprises, no continuity, no wit or dazzle. And quite often, when his teams win, all of his players play well. And that's, you know, we've come to expect so much from this team, and they have delivered very little of what we expect from them in recent weeks, and in particular yesterday in Cardiff. And the problem he has is that he's used 36 players, and that's been kind of, I've written about it and we've talked about it in here. How many of them have played well? Mm-hmm. You know, how many of them have actually helped the World Cup chances? And in particular, the kind of 7 untouchables, the 6 or 7 untouchables, the pillars of his team are all playing badly.
And that's actually one line that Peter O'Reilly has almost exactly here as well in the Sunday Times. Those of us who scribble about Irish rugby will spend time in the coming months trying to decide which players will fill the numbers on the edge of Schmidt's World Cup squad. But his biggest job now is trying to breed inspiration into so many of the players upon whom he's depended in recent years, players who have been made to look human over the last 6 weeks.
Yeah.
You guys will have much better knowledge of the workings of this team than I will, but like, is complacency an issue? Because I remember, I think it was in here that Brian O'Driscoll said that only one England player would get on the Irish team. And I don't know how players don't listen to that and wouldn't be affected by it. He's like one of the best players in Irish rugby ever, more or less telling you that you're better than anyone in England. And I don't know how well the coach has kept complacency out of the team, because Sean Cronin is dropped from the squad altogether after poor performance against Italy. Yet Johnny Sexton and Conor Murray are played into form. Is that not hypocritical? Because it's
not consistent.
Yeah, okay.
Certainly not consistent. I think complacency was an issue sailing into the England game. I think they sailed into the England game full of belief that they were, on the basis that they won like 17 in the previous 18 and beaten the All Blacks and won the Grand Slam and won the series in Australia, which all feels like a long time ago now. I think England caught them unawares and they got a punch in the gut that day and they struggled to recover. I don't think complacency. They couldn't have been complacent based on their last 3 games. Yeah, okay. Maybe they felt like they were back after the France game and that they could just turn up and do it again against Wales. I don't know. But I think it certainly was an issue. It was striking that time. But on Saturday, I did this mano-a-mano thing, list the 2 teams beside each other, gave them a rating out of 10. Yeah. And genuinely, almost every Irish player is better on paper than the Welsh player they're up against. Pretty much every player. Like, these are players that don't do well for the region. It's the typical Welsh thing. They come together. Gatland, Sean Edwards mould them together into an unbelievable unit. And they're not a particularly exciting team to watch. They're not a particularly entertaining team to watch. But they work hard for each other and they took their chances well, and they were clever, and Ireland they just kind of put pressure on Ireland, and Ireland didn't respond well to that pressure. So I think you're right. I think it was an issue at the start, but I don't know how they could be complacent after that. What happened against England?
I know like the rugby media sometimes get a hard time for being too soft. Honestly, the most optimistic line I found in the papers this morning was Bernard Jackman saying, "The post-mortem from this defeat will hurt, but the patient isn't dead. It just needs a reboot." You can trust that. Eamon Sweeney kind of puts the boot in the Sunday window
very
as well.
much so.
So this zings off the page. Pathetic, pitiful, practically pointless. This is one of the worst performances by an Irish team since the return to international respectability in the early noughties. Talks about delusions of progress, and then there's a little dig in there. It's like, this game meant so much to Welsh rugby. It's hard to begrudge victory to a country where rugby really is the people's game.
Yeah, I found looking through the papers as well that the coverage from, I suppose, the UK media, like a couple of the Sunday Times writers like Stephen Jones, were probably a little bit more favourable to Ireland than they probably are here. Like even straight off the player ratings is one I noticed. I'm looking here in the Sunday Independent.
Disappointed.
I see a lot of 4s. I see a lot of 5s, 6s at best. Sean O'Brien, there appears to be a 54 beside him. That might have been a
54 is a good rating.
Could have been either 5 or 4.
They're all out of
Probably
100.
wasn't 54. But I look at the Sunday Times of Stephen Jones. Like, for example, Cian Healy here is given a 4. Stephen Jones actually gave him an 8 yesterday.
Yeah, generous. Probably one of the players who tried hardest to kind of get things going, but probably overtried and gave away a couple of penalties. I think in defence of Stephen Jones, he was doing both teams on the whistle, which is a difficult thing to do, but not to make excuses for him. I wouldn't agree with that rating personally. I think Des Berry's probably more on the money, but again, he's probably, I'm very much watching these games through the prism of covering Ireland, and I'm keeping an eye very much on the Irish team. So I mean, I read the Welsh papers, or the Welsh versions of the Sunday Times on the way home, and I mean, it's Alan Wynne-Jones. If he ever wants to boost his ego, he should just keep these papers and go back to them, because he is the man in Wales right now. Gatland was asked, is he the best player they've ever had, and that's a pretty long list, and he wasn't disagreeing. But yeah, he was the main focus of it all. So I think there's probably a little bit of that you're trying to rate 30 players, you're kind of you're going to miss 1 or 2.
Yeah, I did find it ever so slightly therapeutic reading the Sunday Times kind of match report and reaction, and with Stephen Jones, it was 90% Wales were fantastic, what an achievement, and you're kind of, for a few seconds, it allowed you to forget maybe how poor Ireland were yesterday.
Yeah, and Schmidt argued that going for a Grand Slam gives you about 5%. Now, I don't know where he plucked the figure from, but gives you about 5% more motivation that you've got something really tangible that you're going for, and there's probably something in that. But at the same time, I was in here, having a route with you, McKenna, a couple months ago, and we were comparing Ireland to the All Blacks, and the All Blacks don't dip. They've dipped the odd time, but they don't dip the way Ireland dipped in this championship, and that's the worrying point, because they got to that standard and they haven't been able to stay there. And maybe Steve Hansen was right. Maybe the pressure has gone to them.
All about waiting in the long grass.
Well, yeah, we go back to being the underdog. We're back to now. Ireland are back to third in the world.
This is actually the grand plan.
Yeah,
go back to the underdog.
I'd say by Wednesday we'll get to that level. The different stages of grief. But right now it's fairly hard to be optimistic of what's going to happen in Japan.
Before we move on from the rugby, there was one piece Brendan Fanning had today in the Sunday Independent, and it was, I suppose, just maybe kind of a comparison of Joe Schmidt and Warren Gatland, both of whom were having their last Six Nations games for their respective countries, and just going through the path they kind of travelled to get to where they are now. I thought it was enjoyable read. There's a nice line here about Warren Gatland when he would have come through with Ireland, his first game against France. France were blessed to survive on an 18-16 scoreline. Our predictions had entertained a gap of 50. By this stage in his career, Warren Gatland knew he had found his true calling. He was good with the players and good with the media. Not only would he give quality off-the-record briefings, but if the info was delivered in a lounge bar, he knew where his wallet was, a unique occurrence in our relationship with the Kiwis at the time.
Yeah, Brendan benefits from his longevity here. Like it's a really, like, his, having been at the coalface for throughout these eras, he's written the best book about Irish rugby that I've ever read. From there to here. It's brilliant. I'd recommend anyone to go and find it, and it just tells the story of how Ireland went from that shambles of amateurism, and the crossovers revisited here. Gatland's inability to manage the Blazers, into the kind of uber professional Schmidt era, and the kind of the contrast between the two. There's a lot of stuff in there that I would have known, but at the same time, when it's laid out and told this well, it's just a very, very good read. A lot of people have done the Gatland Schmidt thing this week, but this is a kind of a different way of looking at it.
No, it's terrific.
I did like one line as well towards the end then. For Gatland, beating Ireland or Irish provinces when he was at Wasps has been like bumping into an old school teacher who said you'd never amount to anything when in fact you'd conquered a whole hill of beans. He holds on to his Ireland coaching experience as a discomfort blanket.
Is he just underrated in Ireland, or is he underrated worldwide?
I don't know.
I think he's terribly underrated in Ireland.
I think people have...
There's a grudge, there is a lingering grudge because
Well, the O'Driscoll
he's
stuff.
fond of a little swipe here or there and I'll jibe in the media, and there is the...
He dropped Brian O'Driscoll.
He dropped Brian O'Driscoll in the Lions. But when you look at what he's achieved...
I wonder if he's actually underrated now. I think people probably have a grudging respect. It's, you know, I think he's seen as being this... He's always painted as this manager figure that, you know, others are the tactical brains behind it and that, you know, other coaches are cleverer than him. But this is the third time Joe Schmidt's gone to Cardiff in a Six Nations game. It's the third time he's lost. It was, you know, it was the worst of the three, but they've always been able to find the holes that other team haven't. I mean, Gatland's record speaks for itself, but you know, talk to Sean O'Brien about him. He'll say, you know, he left a series in New Zealand behind him. There's always some criticism, whether it's his methods or his manner. He seems to rub some people up the wrong way. But I mean, when he does finish after the World Cup, regardless of what happens there, his achievements are outstanding. Brendan goes back when he's talking about Schmidt. Goes back to that training session in Harlequins that Luke Farrell's talked about. When Ireland in the 2015 World Cup trained against them before the Romania game, and Fitzgerald ran a line, thought it was the right thing to do, and got rinsed in front of everyone. And funny, Adam Jones was in town this week, and he was saying he's never seen a coach behave the way Schmidt did that day, in terms of running the plays. Every play was micromanaged.
In a good way or a bad way?
He didn't say whether it was good or bad, but when you watch what happened yesterday and the players' inability to react to what happens on the pitch when things go against them, it all feeds into what, you know, the questions that we're answering now. Is like when everything's going well, that kind of management is great. When it's going against you, are the players autonomous enough to turn things around? This is, as Peter says, or O'Reilly says, the biggest challenge of his career. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to see how he responds to it and tries to turn things around.
I even found, obviously I'm not on the beat, so I've never really had any contact with Schmidt, but I'm kind of very interested in how he was even responding in the media yesterday. Like, Peter O'Reilly used the phrase, we've never seen him so human, because he's looking for, maybe not excuses, but ways of explaining it, I guess. But the line about, like, don't give up on this team, I hope the genuine fan doesn't give up on the team, I don't really know what that means. Like, what's a genuine fan? And Shane Horgan questioned it actually on Virgin Media yesterday, said, well, the genuine fan, like, is that just like an unthinking cheerleader, or like maybe the genuine fan is a little bit more critical? So I can't explain that. I just found that a very curious thing to say.
I'd say it probably stems back a bit from the amount of empty seats that were there towards the end of the England game at the start of the tournament.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, he did, and criticism is always graded with him. I mean, I think he buys into the kind of team of us stuff. I think he expects the media and the pundits to be all an extension of the team a little bit, and then that doesn't happen, and I think that leaves him a little bit miffed. So I think that may be a little bit of a dig at the inevitable criticism that will come in today's papers, tomorrow's papers, in the studio for the rest of the week, across the country. And I mean, this is only a microcosm of what's happening, because my Twitter mentions were fairly toxic last night. So you know, it's people are annoyed. So yeah, like I think they have done enough for people to stick with him to a degree. He's there till the World Cup no matter what. Yeah. His replacement is sitting there beside him. So, like, you know, this is the ticket. It's not going to change. There's no even though there was a few calls for heads when people were going home from the nightclubs and stuff last night. You know, these are the men who are tasked with turning things around. So I guess he just wants people to stick with him.
Okay, we'll move on from the rugby. I suppose the big story in the papers from a news point of view is this story in the Sunday Times. John Delaney wrote a personal cheque of €100,000 to the FAI, which he has explained was a bridging loan in April 2017. It's probably something that there is very little information on at the moment, and we can't really speculate too much on what it was. We probably will have further explanation on it in the coming days, because you know, the FAI Awards are on tonight. You know, it's an international week coming up, but hopefully, I suppose we probably will get more of an explanation on it.
Well, most relative is the fact that he's due to appear before an Oireachtas committee on the 10th of April, and that was meant to be on the 20th of February, but it was postponed. So yeah, there's a couple of questions to ask. Absolutely. I mean, the association ran a €2.7 million surplus at the end of 2017. Why does it need a cash flow injection to cover itself from April? he mentioned the fact that he's donating back his UEFA salary.
Yeah.
When was that decided? There's a couple of questions to answer there. Absolutely. I mean, this was given in April 2017. In May 2017, the chief executive was talking in the media about the idea that the association will be debt-free by 2020. Is that the right path to take if there's issues around cash flow? How frequent are cash flow issues? There's just questions to ask, and hopefully you'll be asked them.
Yeah, like there probably is very little we can really discuss on it. It's something that we'll have a lot more information on in the coming week. There is a good bit of football though in the Sunday papers. In the Sunday Independent, big interview with Stephen Ward, who announced his international retirement during the week.
No WhatsApps.
And no mention of WhatsApp whatsoever.
No.
Aside from that, I thought I did enjoy it though.
No, I did. And
himself and former teammate Stephen Hunt in conversation with Colin Young.
Yeah, and I as a former, I'm a Bows fan, and I've been watching Stephen Ward since the days when he was playing in Dalymount Park as a 19-20-year-old, and I think no one at Dalymount would have expected him to go on and have the career that he's had, and it's a testament to his ability and work rate that he has gone on to forge. You know, he was a striker, then a left winger for us, and then he went off to play for Wolves and was being compared to Steve Bull at the start. He ends up left back for Ireland, and I think there's a really interesting bit where he's talking about that period in his career and how it stood to him and how he wouldn't have made it as a kind of an apprentice in an English team. You know, how living at home, his dad was always really strong, and his dad's a guard, and he's really strong on the educational side of it, and he had to do his leaving cert, and he got to live at home, and I think that's something that's probably underappreciated. You know, it's a topic that is coming up more and more in recent times, I think, because it's getting harder to go over there in the first place, and more of the players are coming back. But he would have had, I think he would have had Stephen Kenny as his manager for a while, and Gareth Farley, and then McCarthy spotted him, but he
does mention doing the leaving cert was a big thing.
Yeah.
You know, his father told him, you know, I know it's your dream, but you'll thank me in 10 years' time. And he was right.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, he's told me about playing in the League of Ireland against men when he was 17 and how that stood to him when he went over. Because, you know, players talk about playing in the 23 league in England, and it's just not good enough. You know, it's not a good enough standard. Where he was one of the that kind of wave with Kevin Doyle that went over later and made a really good fist of it. It's an interesting one.
Yeah, he did compare himself a little bit to Kevin Doyle when he would have been a striker initially. He was saying he was of the Kevin Doyle mould, but wouldn't really be scoring as many goals.
No, that was always an issue. But that's why he ended up in the left wing. But he was always an unbelievably hard worker. Like he put in a shift for you. And managers seemed to love him. I think he must have been a really good trainer. He was popular in dressing rooms, which always stands to you.
I always thought it was one thing about him. He was a player who would have been criticised a lot by fans, but at the same time, there have been a succession of Irish managers who would have picked him and given him chances. And you know, that has to stand for something, surely, that he's clearly immensely popular with management and his teammates.
I honestly think that everyone underrates how difficult it is to make it at that level, even at championship level, you know. Yeah. And like, Glenn Whelan is the obvious one. I mean, he's always getting criticised and always getting picked. But like, just on the finish your leaving cert, like that is a huge issue now for Irish football, because I was listening to LOI Weekly, Dan McDonald and Johnny Ward do it, and they were talking to
Sean Kavanagh.
No, but Ollie Cahill, the FAI. And 30% of players in the League of Ireland only have their junior certs.
Yeah.
Like, see, they're going over chasing this dream. There's a heck of a lot of dreamers, and there are very few dreams to go around. And then, you know, you're coming back and, like, what pathways? We haven't delivered pathways in Ireland consistently enough. And Niall Quinn is talking about that now in his view for the League of Ireland. So it's worth pursuing. Like, whatever eventually happens with Brexit, it's entirely possible that our players will be forced to stay in Ireland until 16 or 18. We have to give them more education and just give them a better chance at life if they don't make it in football.
They had Sean Kavanagh on a couple of weeks ago, and he had gone over and he made his debut with Fulham, and he played, you know, senior football, and then he found himself out of the picture. And, you know, he just, the way he talked about the experience of being out of the picture in a club over there and being so isolated from home was terrifying. And then you think about, like, say, James Ryan and Gary Ringrose and these stars of the Irish rugby who, as far as I know, still live at home with their parents and have their meals cooked for them, and you know, have those supports that people age 19, 20 have. And like, you're 16 years old and you're away from home, and you know, it's an unbelievably cutthroat environment. It makes so much sense to stay here if the coaching is good enough to stay here and to be minded a little bit more, because the ones who do make it, it's a remarkable achievement to get through it. It really is.
I did enjoy here. There was he's asked, Colin Young asked him, what's your favourite Mick story? Mick McCarthy, to both Stephen Hunt and Stephen Ward, who would have played under Mick. Stephen Hunt's is a lot shorter than Stephen Ward's. Mine was at Ipswich when the lad sent me into his office the day after a defeat to ask permission for us all to go to Cheltenham. He told me to F*** off.
Yeah, brevity is the soul of wit, I guess.
It's Mick McCarthy's age is a bit of a theme in the papers today. Like, it's like that he's older, wiser, and he's a grandfather now, so he's a bit nicer. Like, they both say, they talk about it. Roy Curtis in the Sun of the World is talking about it as well, how he talking about a study of managers on the sideline and how their heart rates are higher than they would be on a treadmill, and Mick saying, but I love it so much, and Roy is just talking about how he sees a calmer presence now, but like, that would be a negative, and if things start going wrong, suddenly that's going to be a negative. That he's not this young tyro who's coming in to change everything. Whereas Ken, in the way Kenny will be.
Yeah.
It's interesting how these things are framed before anyone's kicked the ball in anger.
Yeah, but like the governing principle is just be different to the guy before. And
yeah.
I'm gonna say it now. The words that should be taboo, but it's still kind of Saipan-ish. Because Roy was, there was not, even Matt Doherty was talking about this week. The atmosphere wasn't great in camp, and obviously stuff leaked out about Roy perhaps not doing too much to contribute to that. So Mick coming in as a kind of a steady father figure. We're endlessly bouncing from Mick to Roy.
Yeah, David Sneyd, I thought, in the Irish Daily Mail took an interesting line on the new Mick chapter by going back to one of probably one of the most awful games we can remember in recent Irish football history. Scars of Skopje. Inside story of how Ireland's Euro 2000 dreams went up in smoke, and why the anger remains just as strong to this day. That 1-1 draw against Macedonia. He looks back and it speaks to a few of the players, the kitman Johnny Fallon. He speaks to a supporter, Gary Spain, who was over at it. And it's not the most uplifting of reads, but it's a brilliant read.
But it's amazing. Like, it's remarkable 20 years on how angry they all still are about it. I mean, time is supposed to be a healer, but like Niall Quinn throws Tony Coscarino under the bus,
absolutely,
for not tracking back, or for kind of letting Stavreski go past him, because Quinn had been taken off, and is still really annoyed. Quinn, who worked with McCarthy subsequently, and you would imagine has a good relationship with him, is still really annoyed that he took him off.
Yeah.
And the wounds are just so they just haven't healed at all. It's quite, it's scathing in parts. It's really interesting.
Even Johnny Fallon, the kit man, he's saying there, football's not a fair game, it never is, but that was one of the biggest kicks in the bollocks we ever got. It took a lot of people a long time to get over that game. A long time. Yeah. And they're still getting over it by the sounds of things.
It's so good. There's such heft to it. He rang a load of people, David, and he also seems to be ringing people who've been waiting 20 years for the phone to ring. Like the Niall Quinn stuff. It gets, it's just great. But it just shows, I mean, the FAI Awards are on tonight, and we're looking back at 2018. There's misery to be found in most years, rather than just 2018. But they go into the to have a Macedonia. So tradition dictated, right from John Giles' year, apparently. I didn't know that. But that the worst trainer of the day would be given a yellow bib to call them out. And then after Jason McAteer got sent off against Macedonia a couple of years before this game in question, we wore that orange kit you were saying outside, Rory. They scrolled, had a Macedonia on it.
Yeah.
Because that became the phrase that they used to describe basically someone who had screwed up quite badly, and obviously then this leaked out to pictures of this bib with Macedonia scroll.
And it didn't go down too well in Macedonia, it seems.
Have you ever heard of better dressing room wall material than a bib, I guess?
They literally have a T-shirt that they wear training every day, mocking us for the last couple of years.
And like Quinn says, we let ourselves down with the I had a Macedonia jersey. He really does regret it. Yeah,
and Gary Bremen talking about it, just how big a thing it was for the players, like being given that jersey for being the worst trainer of the day. There were some lads who'd be disgusted if they got it. There'd be anger at times. Some lads wouldn't speak to you over dinner because you voted for them to get the T-shirt.
But it's not exactly team building, is it? Like, it's not building unity. And then there's just a lovely segue in the middle about how difficult it was to get to Skopje in 1999, and that like 20 years ago, but it feels like a lifetime. It's so easy to get anywhere now. But Gary Spain, spends hours on the tarmac in Rimini, and then they've got a taxi, and it's a really good read, and it's nicely varied. It flows from start to finish with a couple of different tangents that all kind of wrap into one story. It's good.
We are slowly running out of time, actually. The clock is creeping ahead of us until our Premier League game at 2:15. Any other stories you want to bring up in the last 10 minutes or so?
Well, I was go digging for the Sunday Times when I can find it. I really enjoyed it when I first read it on the back of the Sunday Times. David Walsh looking back at Cheltenham and the achievements by female jockeys like Rachel Blackmore and Lizzie Kelly and Bryony Frost, and using this as an example of how. Let me see. Change happens slowly and unevenly. I'm quoting now. Rules can be rewritten, but mindsets took longer. Last week at Cheltenham, it really felt that women were getting somewhere, or to put it more accurately, it seemed that women jockeys reached the point where they were indistinguishable from their male rivals, especially in the tough world of steeplechasing. This is some achievement. And I really liked the piece when I first read it. And then I started thinking about it again. It was like, these are obviously great achievements, and I'm not in any way doing them down. But I find it sometimes frustrating that we look at the achievements of female athletes through the prisms of how they succeed in a male world. So you go back to like Lisa Fallon at Cork City, that great interview with Donald McRae a few weeks ago, and there's this. And sometimes we don't acknowledge the fact that there are, heroes in female sport achieving in female sport, and I don't think that they get enough coverage as like this when it happens in a male.
Well, just want to point out as well in the Mail, we probably don't have time to get to it, like Kelly Harrington has a great interview in the Mail on Sunday with Mark Gallagher today, talking about, just talking about her life essentially. It's a really enjoyable read about how she's still working in her psychiatric hospital and just loving the patients there, and how even if she wins a gold at Rio, she'll still be back there every day of the week. Yeah,
no, it's terrific, and obviously it happens, but I just, sometimes I wish it happens a bit more. And it was just, this is no way an insult to the Sunday Times, but like every single byline in the 12 pages of sport today is from a man, and that's not calling it Sunday Times. I think it's just a problem.
I haven't seen one on any papers.
There's a problem of diversity across the whole industry, and God knows online has it as well. Mm-hmm. But if you just get more female journalists in there, they're better able to tell these stories, I believe. Because I think the best stories, maybe not in their execution, but definitely in digging them up and finding them and doing the interviews, there's an empathy in there and a shared sense of understanding that makes the story better. Just a bit more diversity. And as I said, not just at the Sunday Times, it's a problem all over the place. And digital-wise, it's a problem if you get girls involved, to keep them involved. Because it's hard working on the internet, but it's much harder if you're a woman. Mm-hmm. It's a fact, like.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I do think that they succeeded in the biggest sporting event of the week, so I think that's part of the reason.
Okay.
And it is I guess, at the end of a week like Cheltenham, Dave Welch is looking for an angle that hasn't been covered by everyone else all week, so that's probably where he's coming from. But yeah, there is a dearth of female sports coverage across the board. I mean, that Kelly Harrington interview is excellent, and we don't see her very much on television, apart from the end of the year awards that she was on last year. So it's getting to know a bit about her, the fact that she works in a psychiatric unit, I think, and it's so important to her. It gives a bit more humanity to the story, and it's really interesting. But yeah, no, it is. It's a very male dominated field, and I suppose that's reflected in the coverage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the TV in front of me, the All-Ireland Club Hurling finals just got underway. Ballyhale Shamrocks against St Thomas's. Probably only have a few more minutes left here, but I just saw you folding your paper over the Gavin there. There's a nice interview, I suppose a profile really of Ballyhale Shamrocks from Dennis Walsh about the dynasty they've built up throughout the years.
Dennis Walsh and hurling, so it's obviously, completely brilliant. Talks to a guy called Joe Dunphy. What's most interesting is it uses this, and Philip Lanigan does something similar in the Mail as well, to use the example of Ballyhale to, talk about rural depopulation, basically. Just going to quote a bit of Joe Dunphy talking to Dennis here. All the shops, they're gone. The post office is gone. It used to be an ordinary village with 3 pubs, a lively place. It became a dead village. Driving up through the village, there's nothing. There's only 1 pub now. A chemist opened recently. They were left with the school and PJ Power's garage for a while. That was the height of what was in the village until Billy's Cafe came along last year. That gave it a great boost. It's run by volunteers and it's brilliant, but what kept Ballyhale alive over the years was the hurling. So, just like rural depopulation is a big issue, and it's the best thing about sport is to be able to talk about these wider issues through that prism. And I know I think I've written about it in the past, was like, why in the name of God are these games on St Patrick's Day? Like this season began last year, and like they moved a load of inter-county games to yesterday just to give it St Patrick's Day by itself, these club finals.
I've always found like it's a fantastic idea to have the club finals on St Patrick's Day. Like, it's a lovely idea to, let's celebrate the national games by having the club matches on our national day, but it does create a lot of congestion around the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I was on your side, but like Dennis Walsh in a separate piece below talks to Professor Mike Cronin of Boston College. He wrote the GA People's History, and he says the GA are absolutely right to keep it on St. Patrick's Day. If they're the National Association, it makes sense that they do a major set piece on the National Day. And when we did our study of St. Patrick's Day in Boston College, that's not really that relevant. But if you want a representation of Irishness for a tourist in Dublin on Patrick's Day, between the parade on O'Connell Street and the club finals in Croke Park, you have it all. If you start messing around with the one-shop window, the clubs you've really been putting, the clubs have you really putting two fingers up to the membership now. Sorry, I made a buzz reading that. But yeah, that kind of changed my thinking on it. And I don't want to talk about the GA calendar, but that Dennis Walsh story and what Philip Lanigan is writing, maybe that doesn't get written and we don't get to talk about and consider that if the games don't get their standalone day on St. Patrick's Day.
Okay, we are out of time. Before we go, is there any pieces you want to just tell people at home to read?
Daniel Taylor has a good piece on Millwall and their fans, and
that's in the Sunday.
Yeah, they're playing in the Cup today, and Rod Little writes about them as well. Basically, they've written to their fans, telling them to be on their best behaviour today, no homophobic chanting because we're on telly.
Because they've
yeah, so it's they're interesting. In the light of everything that's been happening in English football with the hooliganism and all that sort of stuff, it's an interesting read.
Oh, and Gavin?
Dermot Gilleese on Dan Jenkins in the Sunday End.
Yeah, I did read that actually.
Lovely.
I loved Dan Jenkins on Twitter.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
He was really good at it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I shouldn't be ageist, but he was great. Apparently he didn't write his tweets. I think he asked, who did he write with at the end? Was it Golf Digest? I can't
remember now.
That's really ignorant of me, I'm sorry. But yeah, no, apparently he dictated his tweets to the office. But he wrote in that kind of short, with kind of sharp brevity that's kind of perfect for Twitter.
Yeah, it was. I was just a good laugh out loud moment right in the middle of a tense period in a major championship, and he used to come out with a great tweet every now and again. But Gavin Cooney, the 42.e, and Ruaidhri O'Connor from the Irish Independent, thanks for stopping in to look back over the paper. Sorry we didn't have longer to do it today. Coming up after the break, we will be live to Craven Cottage for Fulham against Liverpool. Join us soon. Cheers, lads.